Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Beastlord Darmac on normal and heroic difficulty in the Blackrock Foundry.
That's right, and this is probably going to be the third encounter that you'll be progressing on in this instance. It's a relatively easy fight. It's quite long though. There are quite a lot of mechanics that you need to learn, but really it's pretty repetitive and you should pick it up fairly quickly. Now before we do go into the mechanics of this fight, for this encounter you do want to bring 2 tanks. In a 10-man composition you want to bring 2 or 3 healers. In a 30-man composition bring around 5 or 6 healers, and you want a mixture of DPS and cleave DPS. You'll have a lot of fun on this fight. There's multiple ads. Multi-dotting and shit is amazing on this fight. But really, it does revolve around single target. The AoE isn't that important. Now, at the start of the encounter, it's just Darmac by himself, and he has 2 abilities that he'll use throughout the entire fight.
And the first of which is pin down. What he will do is throw a spear at a player's location, and once it lands, it will stun anyone who is stood underneath it, and it will spawn a mob. And basically, the player will be stunned until that mob is destroyed. The mob is just the spear. So really, you just got to move from the spear. It does just spawn as like a little swirly circle, so you have loads of time to move from it, so make sure that you do, otherwise you will be stuck there and all the DPS will have to switch to you just to get you out, as well as healers will have to focus on you because you'll be taking high ticking damage as well.
And the other mechanic that the boss will do is called the pack. This will just spawn a bunch of beasts that enter through a side door in the room, and these beasts themselves have absolutely no mechanics at all, and really they don't hit too hard. You just want your tank to pick them up and your DPS to just slowly cleave them down. You do not need to focus single target them, just passively do it as the fight continues.
So apart from Darmac and his little beast that he does spawn, there are actually 3 caged big beasts in stables around the room. At certain health percentages, Darmac will just stop doing whatever he's doing, jump on the closest beast possible and gain brand new abilities, and he will no longer become a targetable or anything like that. You actually have to kill the beast that he's on. Once that beast has died, he will then gain an ability and a buff from that beast, and then once you get him down to another health percentage, he'll then jump again to the closest beast, and then once again to the third closest beast after that. And then at the end, he just has a shit ton of abilities from all of these beasts that he's killed, and it's a complete and utter mess.
And with that in mind, you need to make sure that he's stood next to the right mounts at the right time so you don't have to deal with the more dangerous abilities for long periods of time. So as soon as he reaches 85% right at the start, take him over towards Iron Crusher, which is the elephant. Once he mounts him, you have to deal with a couple of new abilities. One of them is Crush Armor. This is a tank debuff that reduces your armor by 10% for 15 seconds. This does stack, as you may imagine. What you need to do is just swap on around 2 or 3 stacks or just whenever it drops. And he'll also do something called Stampede. What he'll do is that he'll target a ranged player and he'll charge towards them. Once he reaches them, he'll knock them back and any players around them, dealing quite a large amount of damage. Now generally it's pretty difficult to avoid this ability, but if you're spread out nicely, only a few people will be knocked back, not a lot of people. So just minimize the amount of people that are knocked back by spreading out as much as you possibly can.
Now Iron Crusher's signature ability is something called Tantrum. This is a 5-second channeled cast that will deal ticking raid-wide magical damage every single second, and it is a fair amount of damage and it's completely unavoidable. Really, you just want to pop maybe 1 raid cooldown per tantrum that comes in just to keep everyone topped up. It's not a huge amount of damage, but later on in the encounter it can become more problematic. And the reason why this will become problematic later on in the fight, even after you've killed Iron Crusher, is that the boss will actually gain the Tantrum ability. Now this ability will only be cast when he isn't on another mount, so he can't be on top of a bloody dragon while casting Tantrum and breathing all over the place. It doesn't work like that. He will only cast Tantrum when he's not on a mount. And on top of this, when Iron Crusher dies, the boss will also gain a buff that increases the physical damage he deals by 25%. So just, you got to be a bit more aware that shit's going to hurt a little bit more.
Once you have knocked Iron Crusher over, you'll now have to deal from Darmac from 85% health until you get him to 65% health, and this is when he'll then jump onto the next closest mount. And as soon as he does reach around the 65% mark, you want to drag him over towards Cruelfang, which is the wolf. Now one of the abilities that Cruelfang will do is something called Rend and Tear. This will just leap to a ranged target and apply a dot, and this dot will also be applied to any players within 7 yards of that player as well. So again, it's another reason why you need to remain spread. And do know that this dot actually stacks. If you're unlucky enough, if the same person keeps getting charged on every single time, that dot will just go up and up and up and start dealing more damage. As soon as that dot is applied to that player, he will then jump back and apply the dot to the tank, and then again anyone near the tank. So when this does happen, melee, make sure you're not near the tank, and of course you only want the dots to be applying on one tank so you can actually drop it rather than the other tank. So the off tank, make sure that you're not close to the main tank.
Another ability that Krillfang has is something called Savage Howl. When he does this, it will deal a small amount of AoE damage to any players nearby, but the main thing is that it will increase the boss's attack speed by 75%, as well as any of the little beasts around him. Their attack speed will also be increased by 75%. Now this is an enrage effect, so you can actually dispel this off. However, you don't really need to go around every single beast and individually trank shot them or anything like that.
Yeah.
You can just get it off the main boss. Just make sure you do dispel Krillfang at this time and you'll be absolutely fine. Now when you do kill Krillfang, the boss will now gain an aura that increases the attack speed of any mob, so pretty much the little beast. It will increase their attack speed by 35% throughout the entire fight, and you will actually keep the Rend and Tear ability. And once again, just like Tantrum, this cannot be cast while he's on the last mount.
So you now have to deal with the Rend and Tear, the aura, and Tantrum for the next 20%, and then at this 45% mark, he'll then jump onto the last mount, which should be Dreadwing. Now Dreadwing's tank debuff is something called Searing Fangs. Every time Dreadfang lands a melee hit, it will actually apply a debuff that increases the amount of fire damage that tank takes by 10%. And this goes up really quick, and all Dreadwing's melee hits are actually fire damage. Really, you want to swap this around 10 stacks, and there's not really any other way of dealing with it. Another ability the Dreadwing has is Conflagration. And this is just a dispellable debuff that's placed on a random player. While this player has this debuff, they lose complete control of their character. They'll just run around on a spot almost like a fear. And they'll also start dealing AoE damage to anyone within 8 yards of that person. So you just need to make sure that you dispel them as soon as possible, just to minimize the amount of damage that's going out.
Now Dreadwing's signature ability is Inferno Breath. Now the boss will face a direction and then will do a Fire Breath shortly afterwards. This Fire Breath will deal damage to you and leave a dispellable dot on anyone that pretty much gets hit by it. It will also leave a bunch of fire on the ground, so of course make sure that you don't stand in the fire. It's a bad idea. So the best way of dealing with this is really just make sure you are relatively close to the boss so you can go round him in a shorter distance, because if you're really far away, getting out of the cone would take a much longer time. So make sure if you are close to the boss, you have a much easier time moving out of this ability, and you shouldn't have too many problems with it.
And one thing to note with this ability, the animation of the breath itself is really poor. It's not a great indication of how big it is. It's much bigger than what it seems. So when you are going to move from it, exaggerate your movement and move much further than you think you actually need to. Now, once you have managed to deal with all those mechanics and you've killed Dreadwing off, you'll now have to deal with the boss on 45% health, with the Rend and Tear from Krillfang and the aura that increases the attack speed of the adds, as well as the Tantrum from Iron Crusher. But you'll also now have a load of other things from Dreadwing. All the spears that are currently active in the fight that the boss has been throwing down will now be imbued with fire and will start doing random AoE damage to players in the raid. This is completely unavoidable. The only way of lowering the damage from this is either using cooldowns, which you don't really want to do, or just flat out killing the spears, which is what you kind of want to be doing across the entire fight anyway. He'll also buff the pack, so when they die, they'll actually leave patches of fire in the ground. Don't stand in them. And the boss will also gain the Inferno Breath ability, which is actually renamed to Superheated Shrapnel for absolutely no reason at all. Just to confuse you, I guess.
It's just fucked up. But yeah, that's pretty much it. This last phase is arguably the hardest point because there is so much more AoE damage going out on the raid with the Tantrum and, of course, the ticking damage from all the spears. And, of course, if people get hit by the breath as well, it can really fuck you over. So saving Bloodlust for this point isn't a really bad idea. Kind of up to you. If you feel that you don't need it, of course, then just use it at the beginning of the boss that you normally would. But otherwise, you can save it for this point just so you can get through it much quicker. And really, you just want to be rotating healing cooldowns for each of the Tantrums, because along with all the other abilities at the same time, the raid is going to be taking a lot more damage than usual, so maybe just make sure you use a healing cooldown and an amp at the same time, or things like that. So maybe combo a couple of healing abilities and maybe even some personal cooldowns. But as we said, this boss isn't particularly difficult. It's more just a long fight, and the mechanics, even when you're learning it, they're not so like punishing that it isn't too hard. Just to
you can probably get hit by most of them and fuck up on most of them. But generally, it's like a team effort kind of thing. If everyone reduces the amount of damage they take from these abilities, it's a lot easier for your healers to do it, and eventually you'll just get the kill. There is no Titan Rage or anything like that. It's literally just don't fuck up on the mechanics as much as you possibly can, and the boss will eventually peel over.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you out, then make sure you leave us a like. It helps us out a lot. And if you'd like to see any of our other Blackrock Foundry guides, then make sure you do click up on the annotations you see on your screen now, and that'll take you straight to those videos.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.